Asked me to be the interviewer here, and I concur. I couldn't put the book down. I just had to read it. It's something, if you ever have a chance to, I recommend it. The Loger family, a French name in a German country, and that French name wound up being a lifesaver for them later because of the hatred for the Germans and Nazis during the war. And they lived in Germany just before the outbreak of World War II, and we're going to share not so much the details of the story, but how God blessed this family, first Walter, and then in various aspects of the family, and how God worked in wonderful ways to protect, guide, and bless them all throughout their lives. David, tell us, how did your dad avoid being in the draft?
Well, in Germany, Adventists generally tried to stay out of the army by becoming first aids corps members. There was no such thing as a conscientious objector, so people went into some field in medicine in order to be helpful rather than killing people. So my dad joined the Red Cross and became a chauffeur for the leaders of the Red Cross.
Actually, the president of the Red Cross, I think.
Right, the president, yes. And that continued for some time, but then all of a sudden, one night, by a decree signed by Hitler, the Red Cross, the German Red Cross, was merged into the German army. And
therefore he had to be taken into the army and was sent to the Western Front in France. Now, I don't know which mics are causing it, but Ursie, you were back home in Berlin with the family. You were just a young child, about 6 or 7 at the time. What was the situation regarding your schooling at that time?
Well, the bombing was very heavy in Berlin, so the schools were all closed. And I had an aunt visiting her husband in the army, who was stationed in Berlin at the time. And she experienced 3 days of the bombing, morning and nighttime and daytime. And she could tell that I was terrified with all the bombing. And she says, why don't you send Ursie to us, which is in Sudetenland, which was very close to the Czechoslovakian border. And she can go to school there if we don't have any bombing. And my mother decided to go ahead and let me go at age 7.5.
Okay, so actually for about 2.5 years, Ursie, you were in the Czechoslovakia area with your aunt, going to school where you wouldn't have been able to in Berlin. Now, David, you were there as a younger child, and there were a lot of bombings. Tell us what it was like to experience these bombings.
Well, Pastor, just about every night we would spend in the cellars rather than in our beds. This was like a two-story apartment building that we were living in, and a full basement, so obviously converted to some sort of a bomb shelter, and that's where everybody went when the sirens went off.
You were telling me a couple stories about how God delivered you miraculously with certain bombs.
Oh yes, one particular night we were down in the bomb shelter basement, and all of a sudden the men in the cellar all left, hurried up the stairs, and I guess they became aware that a firebomb had hit the building, and they went up to investigate, and it turned out that it was a small firebomb that came through the roof and slid down the side of the stairwell. On the other side of the stairwell was our children's bedroom, and had the bomb moved just about a foot over to our bedroom, they would not have noticed the incident. As it was, there was buckets of water and sandbags, so they were able to put it out quickly.
The bomb landed right next to the sandbags of water, and they could put it out. But again, that was God's blessing. Well, in the meantime, Walter is back in the Western Front, and his whole unit gets transferred over to the Eastern Front. Walter had been injured in the meantime and was under some medical care, and he's on his way back. What happened on his way back to the Eastern Front?
Well, he managed to get on a train that would get him to Vienna in time to get a stamp in his pass and still be within the time limit that was given to him for making the trip.
Okay, and he's kind of a sneaky guy, wasn't he? He figured out a way to sneak home into Berlin and see his family.
That wasn't part of the plan for him to come to Berlin, but he did.
He knew the system and was able to come and see the family. Well, he goes on to Romania, and something very interesting happened just as he gets to Romania. What changed when he got to Romania?
My dad, well, believe it or not, being captured, taken prisoner, was a blessing arranged by the Lord. Because had Dad been able to meet up with his unit, the entire unit was wiped out in Russia.
So the Romanian government had been, at the beginning of the war, on whose side?
On the German side.
German side. Well, the Russians came in, and what did they do?
Romanians decided to change sides.
They wanted to be with the winners. They changed sides. So suddenly, your dad gets put in jail in a camp. We wanted to show a picture here. You see down at the bottom here in Romania, near Caracas, I guess is where he was captured. And you see the yellow line, and that's the train trip that they took up into Russia. And when you get up there on the corner, you can see where there's a purple line. That's the beginning of where all the different camps were that he was held prisoner. And we're not going to take time to tell all those stories because that's very exciting. You see that in the book. But every one of these places is God's dramatic leading. And over the course of 9 months from his first escape till he gets back to Berlin, God was blessing him through 7 escapes where he got back and to see his family. It took him 9 months to do that. We have some more pictures here. Maybe you could comment on any of these pictures. I look like we've got a family picture up here on the left.
The bottom was when he was wounded and visited and snuck back to Berlin. And I was already away from home.
And that's the whole family in the upper left.
Yeah, that was, yeah. Right.
And then some more of your dad there on the right. Okay, we've got his papers here.
And the upper is where we lived in Berlin.
This is your home on the right.
Yes. And here my brother and sister came to visit me in the mountains near Czechoslovakia, which became Czechoslovakia after the war.
Yeah. And of course, your dad being a driver, here's some of his work with the cars. Well, we'll get back to some of those things in a few minutes. Go ahead.
What I wanted to add here is the 2 pictures of the family. Where we were younger, that was actually in a different apartment that we had lived in before Dad was injured. And we went to see him at the hospital in southern Germany.
Yeah.
But while we were gone, that building was bombed.
Yeah, so God led you to another apartment, and that's where that second story.
That's right.
The first one was absolutely wiped out, so had they stayed there, they probably would have lost their lives in that particular bombing. Well, there were a tremendous amount of things that were happening during Walter's escapes. I want you to just share a little bit about them. Ursie, you have a story about a nurse that you're going to tell us.
At the beginning of is where he met this nurse, and they became friends. And they met after the war back in Berlin, because she was from Berlin and a friend was from Berlin, my dad was from Berlin, and he found out that the nurse was punished because they thought that she helped him escape. And she was put in water up to her neck for a whole week, all day long. She almost died. And the interesting thing is that we came to Detroit, Michigan, and there was a Berliner club, and actually my father had to join that. And then the book was printed, and they says, "Oh, Walter, you have to talk about your book," which he did. And afterwards, this gentleman comes up to him and he says, "Walter, you've got to come to my house and meet my wife, because she was in Russia too, and she would love to talk with you." And they go for dinner, and to my dad's surprise, it was that very nurse. So it was amazing, from Russia to Berlin, and out of all places, Detroit, Michigan, they met again, and she was at my dad's funeral. They became very close friends.
They'd never met before. They meet in the concentration camp. They meet again in Berlin, and then miraculously in Detroit after the war. Again, God's giving them a chance to share their stories with one another. There were a lot of exciting things that happened. Share a few items of some of the things that happened while your dad was escaping.
This is me. It's kind of hard to know where to begin here, but one of the things that we've had the opportunity to enjoy all of our lives was my dad's interest in music. He never took any music lessons, but he taught himself how to play various instruments: the harmonica, the accordion, the mandolins, right? And of course, in the Russian equivalent was the balalaika. So the book talks about that.
Maybe you've seen Dr. Zhivago, the little music where they play. That's what I was like.
And so Dad used those interests and skills and talents that he had to just develop friendships with the Russian populations whenever he had the opportunity. And that came in very handy along his escape route to the point where at one time he actually encountered some Adventist church members in Russia. And he fellowshiped with them, singing very familiar songs, and I see one of those songs is in the bulletin for after the prayer.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful.
He was also hiding always under haystacks. And if he could find a haystack, he hid in the daytime under them. And the mice were very busy crawling all over him. And he used the stars by night to travel, to come back home.
So for 9 months, he's out there just on his own, struggling through the countryside. And a number of times he would get captured, and every time he got captured, God somehow gave him the wits and the wisdom and the skill to get away, and God led him on all the way back to Germany. Well, this took, like we say, 9 months. By the way, when you read the book, if you do, you're going to get a very sanitized story, because this is a story that was written for young kids, okay? They couldn't really tell how bad it really was. The suffering, the beatings, the torture, the private stories of indignities were just unreal. This is what happens in war.
For teenagers, yeah.
Yeah, because it was written for teenagers. I'm not sure that one's working, so, well, if you speak, we can bring it over here. Okay. But anyway, after 9 months, what was your father's physical condition when he got back to Berlin?
He was 98 pounds, so he was not in good shape.
So this big strapping soldier anyway was 98 pounds. It was quite a physical struggle.
But he met an Adventist family in...
Is this one working? No, use this one.
He met an Adventist family in Russia, and they had really a very pleasant time singing and appreciating each other.
Yeah. Well, Ursie, the other side of the story is your story in Czechoslovakia. The war ends, and you're there. What happened then?
Well, the Russians, when the war ended, we were just borderline, the Russians came in, and then the Czechoslovakians took over our part, and they kicked us out of our houses, and eventually we all ended up in a kind of concentration camp, and I ended up being just as alert as my father, trying to find my parents. We had no more contact. I didn't know if they were living, if they were bombed or anything. There was no contact. And so I begged if I could go with one of my aunts and be the beginning of the travel. And
So the Russians loaded you into how many boxcars?
there were 50 boxcars, and
How many ladies and children were in each one?
50 women and children in each boxcar, and we were in the boxcar for 2 weeks, day and night, and it was pitch dark inside. There were no seats, there was nothing,
No windows.
no windows. This is
There was
this
one
is
thing.
kind of easy.
There was one facility in there. What was that?
The potty.
The body.
At a pail, and everybody could watch us go to potty. And then once in the evening, they would open up, stop the train, open up the doors, and a lot of people were very weak, so quite a few people had died on the route, and they just kicked out the dead bodies, and they emptied the potty, and the train went on. And after 1 week of traveling, zigzagging around, we had a head-on collision with another train, and the first 10 boxcars were completely demolished.
And you were in boxcar number?
15.
So again, your life was spared.
And it was, and then the train was divided. Half of the train went to the east, and the other went to the west zones. And I ended up in the east, and that was not an easy thing to find my parents, but since my father worked for the American people, VIPs, it helped very much to get me from the east, the Russian sector, into West Berlin. And
Okay, Peter's the middle name. David, tell us about what your dad was doing after the war.
When Dad came home, after he regained his health a little bit, of course, he always liked cars, and even before, of course, he went to the Red Cross. Obviously, he had to have a driver's license, which was very unusual for most men in Germany to go through that trouble, because it's very expensive. So after the war, he tried to utilize that, and he did, got himself a job driving and working in the motor pool for a radio station called Rias.
Let's just use this one. We'll just use this one.
Rias was an abbreviation for radio in the American sector of Berlin. It was operated by the American Information Agency. And of course, through that connection, my dad met a lot of American officers. And they talked about how wonderful life is in the United States, and how my dad should consider bringing his family over here.
Okay, that planted a seed in his mind. And of course, during this time, life was very difficult in Berlin. And the Allies started what was called the Berlin Airlift. I'm showing you a picture here of the airplane coming in over Berlin during the end of the war and the airlift. And this is significant for more than one reason. You see some highlighted children here, and you can see this afterward. Guess who those children were? Dieter and his younger sister. Ursie was just down the hill a little bit, so the family got a little national notoriety here. by being there because they've been told that there were going to be candy dropped off the planes. Now, that didn't happen, but they got plenty of food. So, anyway, this led to a very difficult decision on the family's part to try to immigrate to America. And it turned out that there was, in Detroit, a group of people willing to sponsor the family. And so this led to, again, a spiritual struggle in the family. Tell us how that came about that your family finally decided to come.
Well, actually, we had been on the list to come over here for a long time, and the hard thing was getting the visa and the sponsors. And the two kind of went together.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden things fell into place, and I actually became sick to the point where maybe I couldn't go with the family. But that cleared up, and my mother, of course, had serious questions about that adventure, whether that was the right thing to do. And we had in Germany an Adventist calendar where every day would be a daily meditation, brief discussion, and a text. And my mom, she looked for that particular date when we were supposed to leave Bremerhaven on a ship. And it was such a comfort that the Lord would be with us wherever we go. And she knew that God was with the plans about us coming to this country.
What made it very difficult was because there was, after the war, there was a little boy born, and he had very serious medical conditions and had to be institutionalized, which meant that he would have to be left there. And this is what made it so traumatic for the family.
Right.
But they knew he was getting the care he needed, and so they had to go out in faith. Now, you find yourself on a ship, headed for America. Ursie, what was it like on that ship?
It was wild. It was in March. It was in March, so the Atlantic Ocean was pretty wild.
Turbulent, yes.
Yes. And they were, one day, I think they were very concerned something could seriously happen to our
The
ship.
10-day trip turned into 14 days.
Yes.
And
So there were some prayer meetings on the
and actually, there was a day, Pastor, when they wouldn't let us go out on deck because it was such turbulence. And in fact, it was almost a hurricane. The next morning, we learned that a ship that was not too far away had sunk. But we were allowed back on the deck, and we thanked the Lord for sparing our lives. But the interesting thing is, before we said our prayers, the storm clouds were still ahead of us. So there was still more coming. As soon as we said the prayers and we opened our eyes, miraculously, the storm clouds were behind us. And ahead of us was the most beautiful rainbow we ever saw.
Wow.
Never forget that.
Wow. Then after you got in the United States, you took a bus to go to Detroit, and a very special sort of a circumstance happened there. Tell us about that.
Well, we went on the wrong bus.
Not knowing the language.
Not knowing the language. And then they needed more money to get back to Detroit and change buses. And we had only $100. And my father, for some reason, had lost $100. We couldn't find him. And luckily, the Greyhound people let us travel for free with 5 of us. And we got finally to Detroit and enjoyed the German Adventist Church.
Well, it's a great story. We invite you to try to take a look at it if you want to know the details. But, you know, God teaches us all throughout our lives. And this family had a wonderful legacy that they got from their father, which is, you want a couple more pictures, you can see some of the early family pictures there.
This was when I came back from Berlin. From Czechoslovakia.
And
This was in America, our first family picture. My parents celebrated 25 years of marriage.
Just before your father was aging, and
Yeah.
Pastor, that picture, by the way, is out in the lobby.
yeah, the painting. There's a couple of paintings that Walter had out in the lobby, and there's other pictures that you can see afterwards on the way out here. Which was good. And just before his death at 90 years old, he was. Here's some of the family. Notice Ingo and Ursie are members here. David and his wife are members at Eagle Rock. The family was all blessed by the talents that Walter had. And he was a musician, and all the family members became musicians. Dee was in several of the top singing groups in Westland. Mitzelfeld Chorale and Wagner. Dee also started the very first program for the Sandell Club here in the chapel. The Sandell Club was a large club when this church was first started for the young people, and she had that very first meeting here. Ursie has been a member here for many, many years. Also has been involved in music. David's been in Christian Edition, and all our people of faith, their legacy is strong because they love their God who has guided them through their lives. And we want to thank God for bringing us through safe and bringing you folks safely here to America. Let's bow our heads as we conclude the prayer. Gracious God, we come today to thank you for your love, your guidance, your blessing. We thank you, Lord, for the many times in our lives where you lead us to the places of knowing that you're there to help us through. May our faith be strong in you. Continue to bless this family as we move forward, each one of us. May we have that same kind of faith that you will work things out. We ask in Jesus' name.